Have you ever missed that picture perfect shot because you were battling with camera settings? Well, trust me, I've been there too.
Come on, I gotta get this shot. I think I'm still overexposed.
But imagine capturing beautiful images effortlessly, even when the light is changing rapidly and you're moving fast. In this video, I'm going to share a technique that completely changed my photography, that being auto ISO on manual mode. Cameras offer a variety of modes, and each has its place depending on the situation. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that you should use one mode or the other. It's up to you depending on that individual situation. But I do want to share with you why auto ISO is an absolute game changer for me and why I use it so much. Whether you're into wildlife, portrait, travel photography, landscape photography, this approach is really guaranteed to change your photography forever. Let's break down the essentials of exposure. There are 3 settings that affect the amount of light that comes into your image. The first one being ISO. ISO is the gain or sensitivity of your camera's sensor to light. If your ISO is high, it can introduce noise and grain into your image, which can degrade the quality. So if you can, it's best to keep it as low as possible, especially in daylight or bright situations. Secondly, there's aperture, which controls the amount of light your lens can let in. This is managed through an f-stop number. A smaller aperture or a high f-stop number lets in less light but creates a deeper depth of field, which means the whole of your image is going to be in focus. A large aperture or a low f-stop number is going to let in more light but create a shallow depth of field, meaning that only your subject is probably going to be in focus. Having a smaller aperture or higher f-stop number is great for landscape and travel photography. But if you're wanting to do something like portrait, maybe a lower aperture number or a higher aperture is better for you. So now I'm out in the field and I'm going to show you how different apertures affect the depth in your image. So if the background is very cluttered and I don't want it in focus, I'll shoot at a low aperture at something like f4 or f2.8 or even f6. But if I want to keep the background in focus, then I'll shoot anywhere between f8 and f16. To show you this, I'm here and I'll give you an example of 2 photos, one at f4 of me and one at say 13 of me with the background in focus, and you should see 2 noticeable differences with a low aperture and a high aperture. Thirdly, there's shutter speed. A faster shutter speed is going to let in less light, but more likely to capture action and drama if it's moving very fast. A low shutter speed will let in more light, but it won't be able to capture your fast-moving subject. But it is great if you want to create intentional blur in your image, such as a creek running in a landscape image. So now we're out on this hike, and I want to show you how shutter speed is going to affect your image. I'm going to shoot my girlfriend trail running, and I'm going to shoot one at a low shutter speed and one at a high shutter speed and show you guys the difference. Most cameras offer 3 primary shooting modes. Shutter priority lets you set the shutter speed while your camera automatically adjusts the ISO and the aperture to properly expose your image. This is great if you're photographing something like wildlife or sport and the action is moving very fast. You can set that shutter speed very fast and everything else will be adjusted by your camera. Aperture priority or AV is basically the reverse. You set the aperture and your camera will automatically change the shutter speed and the ISO to properly expose your image. This mode is great when you want to control the depth of field, but you're not too concerned about the shutter speed. If you're shooting landscapes, you can put on aperture priority, set your aperture to a really high number, and everything else will be automatically adjusted. Especially if you're shooting on a tripod, it's a great mode. You can also set the minimum shutter speed that your camera will take on this mode. This is great if you're shooting something like portraits. You don't necessarily need a high shutter speed, but you still need something to capture a bit of movement. Using a minimum shutter will essentially prevent you from taking blurry images when you're shooting portraits of people in aperture priority mode. Lastly, there's manual mode, where you have complete control over all the settings. While manual mode provides the most creative freedom, it can be challenging to change the settings if things are moving quickly. That's why I love using manual mode with auto ISO. It combines creative control with adaptability. Here's how it works. You set the shutter speed and aperture based on your creative vision, and you let the camera control the ISO with the available light. This approach is perfect for dynamic environments where the light is changing very fast, or maybe there's different things in your image that are changing, or you're moving very fast. If I'm shooting a puffin in the water at 1/500th of a second, and all of a sudden a second puffin comes into that image and I have to turn up my shutter speed, it's going to take even more time for me to adjust the ISO. But if I'm on auto ISO, I can let the camera adjust it for me, while I only have to worry about the shutter speed. This way, I have the perfect moment to capture that shot. One thing to keep in mind when using any automatic mode in your camera is exposure compensation. Cameras aim to make every scene medium gray, which isn't ideal for all conditions. Bright scenes can get overexposed while darker scenes can be underexposed. Adjusting the exposure compensation lets you keep control to be able to capture that perfect shot. We haven't finished yet, but if you do have any ideas for me on future videos you'd like me to do, please drop a comment below. As a new YouTube channel, it really helps me out. So when you're out in the field, to start using automatic ISO on manual mode, the easiest thing you can do is first off, put your camera in manual, and set your ISO to automatic. And in some cameras, you can also set the maximum ISO that your automatic ISO is going to achieve. So if you're not comfortable going above 6400, for example, you can set your maximum ISO at 6400 and your camera will not go above that. So the way manual mode with automatic ISO works is that you set your shutter speed and aperture manually and your camera automatically changes the ISO to get the right exposure. Now, there are times where your camera is going to make mistakes, but you can correct this using exposure compensation. This wheel on your camera lets you dial down or turn up the exposure. Now I'm going to show you two different images here with my girlfriend against this bright background. One's going to be to a negative exposure compensation and one's going to be to a positive, and we'll see the difference. So to help you achieve the correct exposure when taking images this way, a great idea to do is to turn Zebra on for your highlights. What it does is when you're taking images, if you're overexposing in your highlights, it'll start blinking in black and white. That's why it's called Zebras. And when this is on, you can just turn down your exposure compensation. It'll darken that area and make sure it's correctly exposed. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you did enjoy it, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, and we'll see you all next week.